Bethesda Studios, one of the most accomplished and well-known game development studios in the world, responsible for classics like the Elder Scrolls franchise and the Fallout series, with standout games like Skyrim, Skyrim Remastered, Skyrim Anniversary Edition, Skyrim Smart Fridge Edition, Skyrim Alexa Edition. Today, the studio is an absolute behemoth. However, it wasn't always smooth sailing for Bethesda. In fact, the studio came this close to shutting down in the early 2000s. This is the story of how Bethesda almost went bankrupt. It all started in 1986 when Bethesda Softworks was founded by Christopher Weaver as a division of his company Media Technology Limited. He founded Bethesda as an experiment to see if the PC market would be viable for video games. Because believe it or not, back then PCs weren't really used for video games, that was more reserved for consoles. So Gridiron was born. It was Bethesda's first game and it was available on the Atari ST and the Commodore 64. Due to Bethesda's super low budget for the game, it actually shipped in plastic bags, but that didn't stop the game from being somewhat successful, selling a couple hundred units. The success of Gridiron caught the attention of a little known studio called EA, and EA was so impressed with Bethesda's skills that they hired them to help them out on the very first Madden game, which at the time seemed like a massive opportunity for Bethesda, working with an industry giant like EA Sports. However, this collaboration came crushing down because EA and Bethesda got into a legal battle. Allegedly, EA was taking mechanics and game systems from Gridiron and putting them into their own game Madden, without Bethesda's permission. Guess EA hasn't changed one bit. The two studios came to an agreement outside of court, so we'll never really know the details of what happened. Fast forward to 1991 and Bethesda dropped their second game, based on the popular movie you might have heard of, the Terminator. The game also came out alongside the movie Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The game received a lot of positive reviews, however there was one review that stood out to me and I found it absolutely hilarious. The instruction manual wasn't very clear and the use of joysticks for controls was hard. Modern gaming must be absolute hell for that reviewer. All these joysticks everywhere, my god. So overall the Terminator game was successful. In fact, it was so successful that it topped the gaming charts when it released, which makes it seem like nothing could go wrong for Bethesda. Their games were a success, the company was expanding, and by 1993, Bethesda had over 40 employees. And now we're in 1994. This year was an important one for Bethesda. That's because they tried to switch things up a little. They decided it's time to move away from sports games and movie spin-offs and instead try something a bit more creative and original. So in 1994, they released an open world fantasy game that went on to become an absolute cult classic, The Elder Scrolls Arena. Arena was the first game in the Elder Scrolls franchise, and this game really put Bethesda on the map. The game received a lot of positive reviews and it actually gathered a pretty big cult following. Players really praised Arena for pushing the envelope when it comes to game design by crafting an infinitely big open world that was procedurally generated, which was kind of unseen at the time. Game historian Matt Barton said, "The Elder Scrolls Arena set a new standard for this type of computer RPG, and it demonstrated just how much room was left for innovation." After the success of Elder Scrolls Arena, Bethesda knew that they were onto something. So they started working on a sequel, and just 2 short years later in 1996, we got The Elder Scrolls Daggerfall. Daggerfall improved on basically everything from Arena. The player was able to travel to 15,000 cities, towns, villages, and dungeons. The experience point system from Arena was replaced with a role-playing based system that rewards players for utilizing role-playing elements within the game. Additionally, Daggerfall offers more customization and a class creation system that allows players to create their own class and assign skill points. The game was a hit. Bethesda shipped 120,000 discs of Daggerfall across stores in the US, expecting to sell around that many copies. And they should have been way more confident in their own product because Daggerfall sold 100,000 copies in 2 days. Absolutely everybody wanted to play Daggerfall. And by the year 2000, Daggerfall sold over 700,000 copies, which back then is a lot. And let's not forget to mention that Daggerfall won 2 Game of the Year awards, Best Computer RPG and Best Action Adventure Game. The insane success of Daggerfall gave a massive influx of money to Bethesda, as well as a confidence boost. At this point in time, Todd Howard was over the moon. Bethesda struck gold with the Elder Scrolls. So wanting to keep the momentum going, Bethesda decided that they'll do 2 spin-off games and 1 mainline game. For now, we're going to focus on the 2 spin-off games, Elder Scrolls Legend Battlespire and Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard. Redguard. These two games were released in 1997 and 1998, which, if you have been paying attention, is way less development time than the other games, which means that these games only had 1 year of development each, compared to Daggerfall, which had 3 years of development, and it was the sole focus of the studio. Whereas now Bethesda Softworks was split into 3 teams, 2 teams working on the 2 spin-off games and 1 team working on the mainline game. So much smaller development team and way less development time. What could go wrong? Elder Scrolls Legend Battlespire. It was originally intended to be an expansion pack for Daggerfall, which focused on the best parts of Daggerfall, the dungeon crawling. But as a result of a much smaller development team, the scope of Battlespire was way smaller compared to Daggerfall. And instead of offering a massive open world, they focused on smaller, more compact dungeons to explore. Unfortunately, the reception to the game was pretty negative. Most players were pretty disappointed that unlike previous entries in the franchise, Battlespire done very little to push the franchise forward. And as a result, Battlespire was ultimately a commercial failure. Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard. Redguard was the second spin-off game for the Elder Scrolls franchise, and unlike Battlespire, Redguard took a different approach. This game was an action-adventure game that was inspired by the likes of Tomb Raider and Prince of Persia, and in order to try something new and fresh, Redguard was the first game that forced the player to have third-person perspective. Redguard received positive reviews, and it was even nominated for some awards, like Best Adventure Game, which it ended up losing to Grim Fandango. Overall, Redguard was still a commercial failure for Bethesda, with Todd Howard stating in an interview, "Redguard didn't do well for the company." Now, Bethesda had 2 back-to-back commercial failures. And keep in mind that at the time Bethesda was relatively small, they had to pay for all the game development out of pocket. So now they were in a bad financial situation. Back in the day, games didn't offer any microtransactions or DLC, so once a game shipped and people bought it, that was basically it for income. And because the 2 spin-off games didn't really sell many copies, Bethesda had no money coming in. So 2 back-to-back failures could result in the studio going broke, which was exactly the case with Bethesda. As a result of this, Bethesda was forced to restructure completely and downscale massively. Bethesda Softworks split into 2 companies, ZeniMax Media, which was responsible for the admin stuff as well as publishing the games, and Bethesda Game Studio, which is responsible for, as the name suggests, developing the games. Now Bethesda had a whole new structure and they were basically on the edge of bankruptcy. So they decided to give it one last shot and developed one more game.
And it's kind of like, this is our last shot. Like, if this one doesn't work, we're not here.
And this one final attempt ended up being The Elder Scrolls Morrowind. You know, earlier I said that the studio was developing 2 spin-off games and 1 mainline game? Well, Morrowind was that mainline game. But at the time of development, Bethesda realized the scope for Morrowind was just simply too big and it exceeded what they could do with the technology they had. So they decided to put the game on ice and instead focus on the 2 spin-off games. And once Battlespire and Redguard released to no commercial success and Bethesda was on the edge of bankruptcy, something happened. I feel like the team at Bethesda had a change of mindset or approach when it comes to developing games. Their back was against the wall and they had nothing to lose. So as Todd said,
let's just make the game that we think we should be making.
In my mind, they basically knew Bethesda was done, over, going bankrupt. They probably thought no matter what they did, Bethesda was going to go bankrupt, so instead of trying to save the company, let's just have fun with it and make a good game. And this really shows in Morrowind. In previous Elder Scrolls titles, all the assets were made using random algorithms, whereas in Morrowind, everything was handcrafted. You can tell the team put a lot of time, effort, and love into crafting this game. And as a result of all this hard work, Bethesda did the impossible. On the brink of bankruptcy, Bethesda released The Elder Scrolls Morrowind in 2002. The game was a massive success. The game released on both PC and on the original Xbox, which probably added to the success. And by 2005, Morrowind sold over 4 million copies. Morrowind was in the top 10 best-selling games a year after its launch, a feat which was only achieved by Halo at the time. Critics praised the game, players couldn't get enough of it, and just like that, that one final attempt, that one final shot turned everything around for Bethesda. Morrowind saved the company from collapse. The success of Morrowind allowed Bethesda to expand and make bigger and better games than ever before. In 2006, we got Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and I'm pretty sure I don't have to tell you how successful that game was. 9.5 million copies sold. Then in 2007, Bethesda acquired the rights to the Fallout franchise, and the following year, we got Fallout 3. And the rest is history. Bethesda's story shows what can happen to a game studio that loses sight of what makes their games great and instead focuses on the numbers and prioritizes quantity over quality. Luckily, with the back against the wall, they seem to have found their way into making great games again, up until recently. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and subscribe if you think going bankrupt doesn't sound fun. Bye.